Hello, everyone. Welcome to Acenti's Workshops to Express Creativity, Engaging Canadian Seniors, a project made possible through the financial support of Employment and Social Development Canada as part of the New Horizons Seniors Program. My name is Licha Canton, and I'm the founding editor-in-chief of Acenti magazine. This is Acenti's second series of workshops, and today I'm pleased to welcome you to The Power of Food, How Recipes Preserve Memories with Giulia De Gasperi. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from Jojage, unceded Indigenous lands, historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and we acknowledge them and the first storytellers of this land. It's my pleasure to introduce writer, editor, and literary translator Giulia De Gasperi. She's a member of the Writers' Union of Canada. Her nonfiction writing focuses on issues of inclusivity and well-being. She often writes about food. Born in Italy, Giulia has lived in Canada and Scotland. These days, she divides her time between North Carolina and Ireland. Giulia loves to read, especially Canadian literature, and she is particularly interested in diasporic writings. She curates Collana Canada for the Italian publisher Les Flâneurs Edizioni. Welcome, Giulia. We're looking forward to listening to you. The microphone is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Licha, and thank you, Dominic and Acenti, for inviting me to be the first person in this workshop series. I feel a lot of pressure. And thank you, everyone, and welcome to my study in North Carolina today. And thank you for being here with me tonight. Well, today, this afternoon, actually, already. So I do have a little bit of a PowerPoint, very short. Not too busy. It's just an excuse for me to share some of the pictures that I took of the food that I made during the years. Oh, no. I do it like this then. So the first PowerPoint, it says overview. I just want to quickly go over the workshop and how I envision it to be structured. Just a reminder that no one has any pressure whatsoever to speak or share or participate. You are just free to listen and take notes and question. And if you have any questions, you can ask them. At the end, there will be 15 minutes of time dedicated to question and answer. But if you have urgent question to ask, you can just write it in the chat, and maybe during the sharing thinking time, I can just have a quick look and then we can talk. So there will be a little bit of an introduction by me, so I can position myself within this workshop and tell you how I came to be interested in food, recipes, memories, and identity. There will be, I'm going to share a recipe that is going to help you go through the objectives of this workshop. And then there will be some prompts, some questions, the same that I am using to present to you the recipe that I've chosen to share with you today. And there will be 6 in total, and they will be presented to you 2 at a time. And I'll give you some minutes to reflect on them, and then we're going to have some sharing, and then the other 2, and so on and so forth, and until we get to the end of it. And then at the end, there will be question time. So I'm going to start. So these are some of the, as I said, I use this PowerPoint just an excuse to share some of the pictures of the recipe that I prepared along during the years. If there's any of these that you're interested, just let me know if you want to know about any of them. Introduction. And I'm going to read, and the only reason why I'm going to read is because I can speak about this for ages, and I know we have so much time at hand, so I'm just trying to be very focused. I began to pay attention to food, recipes, and memories when I left Italy. When people knew I was Italian, they poured over me an identity mold made up of cliché and stereotypical ideas. I wasn't brought up in the kitchen with a grandmother who taught me how to cook, which is the idea that most people have about the person that I was supposed to be because I was Italian. But my grandmother, who lived with us, my mom's mom, wasn't a cook. She was a seamstress, and that was her only job. No one expected anything else of her. There were other people in her family circle that took care of her, cooking included. And when the circle began to shrink, because people moved away, got married, started their own family, passed away, the duty of feeding her and others fell upon my mom, who was actually indeed a very, very good cook, a very, we would say, like old-fashioned traditional cook. But so the potential was really there for me to kind of fit into the mold of being brought up in the kitchen with my mother. But my mom and my dad both had full-time jobs. And my mom had also shifts on top of that. And she was really not around the kitchen. And because of that, my dad decided to learn how to cook so that he could feed us when my mom wasn't around. When I moved out of Italy, and this still happens nowadays, even though I've been living outside of Italy, next year it will be my 20th anniversary of not living in Italy, I always feel judged, as if I'm not meeting people's expectations of what I should be like or what I should know. And in the context of this workshop, the fact that I should know how to make anything that has to do with Italian cooking from scratch. So to compensate, and because when I left Italy, I started to live with roommates, I had to feed myself. So I started to cook, and maybe not strangely enough, but surprisingly enough, I knew how to do things. Even though I wasn't taught how to do things, I saw people cooking. And when it was time for me to recreate those recipes, I just knew how. So at first I cooked just for myself. Then I think my food smelled really, really good. And so my roommates asked me to cook for them, which I did. And eventually I made friends. And so I would cook for my friends. And as time went by, I cooked with my friends. And one of those people turned out to be my now husband. So most of the recipes that you see in this PowerPoint are actually dishes that I prepared with him. But there were a couple of friends that were really, really interested in learning more about my cooking, and so about me. And when we were sharing recipe, when I was cooking, I was sharing recipes, I was talking about single ingredients, and they would ask me more questions. And all these recipe became memories, because when I was talking to them about how the recipe came to be and why we did this and this in my family, I was also talking about me and my memories and my parents and my grandparents. And so they got to know me better. They got to know Giulia as Giulia is, and not as Giulia was expected to be. Importantly, the memories in my recipes are memories of experiences that of past lives that I might not have took part of or experienced directly, but by reproducing them, I still try to recreate those memories, because when the recipe were made or when we were eating the dish, people were talking about why they were important for them. So they became mine. And when I reproduced it for my friends, they also became their memories. And so the recipe grows and grows and grows every time you are sharing it with somebody, because it adds a layer of the memories that are created the moment that you are making the recipe. And to give you an example, I am actually going to talk. So first of all, these are the objectives that I would like you to think about and take away from this workshop today. That simple recipes and memories, and this is going to be the example that I'm going to talk about, how the simplest recipe with very few simple ingredients can hold the most profound and important memory to you. However, if you move around like I did, the recipe changes in time and place and adapts to different circumstances and different ingredients. Now, from a recipe that holds memory, you also create your identity. And this is also part of the recipe that I'm going to share in a minute. What is interesting to me is the debating that I have sometimes between, should I just preserve the memory without recreating it? Or should I reproduce it, even though I know for sure that it's not going to taste the same? So I am now going to have a Madeleine moment like Proust was talking, because it's not going to taste the same. And so the memories are probably not going to come out exactly the way that they should, because it's not the same. So is it worth to reproduce anyway? Or is it better to keep it as you remember it? And also the last thing that I want to remind you is that this recipe had layered memories, because every time you share it with somebody, they become also theirs. So before I start to talk about the recipe, I would like to mention the book that you see, that is Bacon's biography, a life story recipe. Recipes by Diane Tyne, who is a professor in the folklore department at Memorial. And this is a very interesting book. She is an academic, but the book is not extremely academic. It is a read for everyone. And she, I want to read a quote at the end of the book that says, "Hidden among the simple lists of ingredients and directions for everyday foods are surprising stories." And this is the case for me, and also for the author of this book, who actually learned more about her mother, recreating the recipes that her mom was used to make. She was the wife of a minister, so she had a lot of commitment, Sunday teas, lunches with the ladies, picnics, all sorts of things that she had to do, that she reluctantly do. She didn't enjoy doing that, but she did them anyway. And so there are memories there that are not necessarily the most pleasant, but they still helped shape the view of the author, that actually took the time to reproduce all these recipes so that she could know her mother better. And it's interesting, she also mentioned Maud Montgomery in this book, because she was also the minister's wife, and she also reluctantly had to recreate all these recipes, and it was not really part of who she really was, but in a way it was. That's how people knew her, even though they didn't know that she did not enjoy doing that. So the picture that you see there, polenta ai funghi, so the recipe that I've chosen just to show you how the simplest of recipe can hold very important memories, is polenta ai funghi. So polenta, like cornmeal, and mushrooms, wild mushrooms in my case. The picture that you see there, I think we were just trying to show off to my husband, who was visiting, and we kept on mentioning to him how polenta and funghi, they are good in themselves, just the two of them together, but sometimes we eat them with all the other things. And the polenta that you see there, yellow and white, it's actually the pre-made in the package that you just slice and grill, which is not something that we actually would do in my house, because we are a white polenta family. And we just use the liquid one, the one that you have to stir constantly. But I think we really wanted to impress my husband, so we did all those things, and I think we were kind of overwhelmed. So why did I choose this particular recipe? I chose this recipe because it is the perfect example of an extremely simple recipe that brings together both memories and a sense of identity for me. Now, In order to make polenta, you just need water and salt, and that could be it, and the cornmeal, of course. But you don't have to add anything when it is ready, unless you want to drop a dollop of butter or some grated cheese. But if it is a very good quality polenta, you don't need to add anything in there. So that is like 3 ingredients. And for the wild mushrooms, it should be porcini mushroom exclusively, but sometimes it's like a mixed mushroom. And so the mushrooms, a little bit of olive oil, some chopped garlic, and then at the end of the cooking time, you sprinkle some parsley. So again, very, very simple. And I chose it because it is made up of 2 of the most important components, I think, of who I am as far as food is concerned. So polenta, because I am from northern Italy, I am from the Po Valley, and I am what people are used to call I am a polentona. And I think Licia, it should be a polentona too, because we are both from from northern Italy. So polentona is supposed to be still nowadays. I don't think it's used as much, but it's a derogatory term because it underlines how poor we used to be, and polenta was the only thing we could afford to eat breakfast, lunch, dinner. Now, of course, it is like a very gourmet, a very chic thing to eat in, upscaled restaurants. But I do not take offense when people call me polentona, because I am one, because I do like it, and so it's okay. So, but polenta represents, so my identity is with the polenta because polenta is from where I'm from. So from the northern Italy, from the Po Valley, and from the Veneto region, which is where I'm from. And the fungi represents the Dolomites, the Alps, and the Dolomites in particular, and in particular the Veneto Dolomites, because my father's grandparents were from there. And fungi have always been a big component of not only our eating habits, but our food, our everyday life in general. How does this recipe relate to preserving a memory? Puente fungi helps me preserve memory, memory, because just naming it, I don't even have to eat it. I just need to talk about it, brings me back home to the end of summer, the beginning of fall, when the weather has been perfect, and expert mushroom gatherers, like my father, knew it was time to travel up to the mountains. It was about a 2.5-hour drive, and search for the perfect mushrooms. And the perfect mushrooms are, in my dad's opinion, and now my own, porcini mushrooms, wild porcini mushrooms, not farmed, although it's not very common to farm them. But mushrooms need a companion dish. And so here is where the polenta makes its entrance, but not any kind of polenta. As I mentioned earlier, it's not the ready in 5-minute kind that you can still make the soft, or the block that is already made, that is wrapped in plastic, that you just slice and grilled. I'm talking about the old-fashioned, the ancient flour that is milled, and that takes 45 minutes to prepare, while standing on the stove and stirring constantly for 40 minutes. That is the kind of polenta that I'm talking about. So, and this polenta brings back the lives of both my parents and my grandparents, where I'm talking when food wasn't plenty and you had to do with the little you had, and it was still good. How does it also help in forging identity? I feel this recipe sits in a perfect position as far as my identity is concerned, because I am Italian, I am from the Veneto region, I am from the Po Valley, and I believe that if I have to choose any food, any ingredients that represents me, I would say polenta is what represents this region, its inhabitants, and thus me. And mushrooms, but not any kind of mushrooms. Wild mushrooms and porcini mushrooms are what comes to mind when thinking of the Dolomites. So the other component of my identity. So what emotion does it elicit when preparing it? Of course, I have to say that time goes by and life happens, situation changes, people come and go. So sometimes what I feel in a day is not the same that I feel the other time that I eat the recipe. But in general, when I eat it, I feel, of course, a strong sense of nostalgia. It makes me miss my parents. It makes me particularly miss my mom, who is no longer with us. It makes me think about a time when things were simpler because I was younger and there was more bliss and there was more hope and there was more sense of possibility and opportunity. And in general, this recipe makes me think about the simplicity of it all, how very few ingredients you need to make it happen, how when it is ready and I sit down to enjoy it, I remember the last time that I ate it with my parents. I try to remember what we talked about, how we were feeling that particular day, what we did next. And when I cook it with my husband, we talk. So this is when layered memories in a recipe come into play, because I cook it with my husband, and when we do that, we talk about, yes, the first time that he tried it with my parents, but then we also talked about that time that we went to the Dolomites with my mom and dad, when he stood on an incline and he played the bagpipes in honor of my dad's parents, when we were overcome with the smell of the forest, when we dip our fingers in the cold water of the very few last remaining fountains that are still working up there. Does it taste the same as the one you're trying to recreate? And if it does not, how does that impact the memory that you're trying to recreate? So among the many reasons, other than the other, because I was living by myself and I had to feed myself, and I felt I need to prove that I knew how to cook. One of the many reasons I began cooking was that when I was living in Prince Edward Island, there was a lack of Italian restaurants and a lack of good Italian ingredients. And so I learned from scratch to prepare many dishes, but there were several times when I couldn't find the right ingredient. So I couldn't find, for instance, good cornmeal or wild, porcini mushrooms that were dried. So when I lived in Scotland, it was easier because my dad, it was permissible for me to travel with a suitcase full of stuff, food that I bought at the store in Italy, or that my dad used to dry the porcini mushrooms, and he would make this little sachet and he would just give it to me, and they would last for quite a long time. But now I live in North America, and you cannot bring in mushrooms. And also my dad, who's now 80, does not go up to the Alps to gather mushrooms anymore. So my husband, who really wants me happy, tried to replace these wild mushrooms with bought mushrooms. And so we tried one time. I wasn't really happy. It made me really, really sad. Like I said, this is not the same. So I personally gave up. I told him, said, going back to preserving or reproducing it at all cost, I choose to preserve by not reproducing the recipe, but just remembering what it used to taste like with the right ingredient, because it depresses me too much, and it just does not elicit any memories when it does not taste. I'm not saying that it has to taste perfectly the same in the most authentic way. It just has to be close to it, and it is not. And so I choose not to reproduce. How important is it to you to pass it on? So I think sharing, I didn't realize how strong a friendship you can build upon sharing recipes and by this I mean really making recipe together with friends, which means going to the store, try to find ingredients and cooking together step by step. That built a very, very strong friendship, which made me want to do it more. But at the same time, I think that once you share a recipe with somebody, it becomes their recipe. So I imagine this sharing as other seeds from trees that are falling and taken away by the wind, and then they have a life of their own. So the beginning is the recipe, that the more you share it and the more you travel with it, takes a life of its own, or the roots of a tree. So the recipe is the tree and the roots keep on just expanding, expanding, expanding. That's a kind of a way I see these layered memories being preserved. And I think it is just a wonderful way to get to know somebody in a very intimate way, because some of the recipe have very profound memories linked to them. And so that is the end of my 15-minute presentation. I am going to pull up the prompts. So the first two questions that I would like you to think about are the recipe that you've chosen to share with us today, why, and how it relates to preserving your memories. And I will give you like a couple of minutes so I can drink a little bit of water, and then I'll see if anybody wants to share. And I'm gonna put the 2 minutes on, and I'll see if there's any question in the chat in the meantime. And I want to remind everybody, there's no pressure. You don't have to share. You don't have to talk. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. It would be fun. I would enjoy and appreciate it, but I also understand that some people are just here to listen. Okay, thank you. I'm going to put 2 minutes on, and then I'm going to check on you if I know how to use the stopwatch. And I'm going to check the chat. Okay, we are back, checking in to see if anybody would like to. Actually, I prompted my mistake. Yeah. checking in to see anybody would like to share the recipe that they brought with them today. Don't be shy.
I can share mine.
Yes. Who's this? I'm sorry. I
It's-
don't know if I can see.
It's Christina.
Ciao, Christina. Hi.
Now,
Ciao. Yes, tell me.
so I didn't prepare anything because I
Okay.
didn't read the instructions, but I want to share a recipe for pancotto e patate.
Ooh,
This
yeah.
is Pugliese comfort food. It's the ultimate comfort food, and a real example of cucina povera,
Mhm.
just making do with what you have.
Yeah.
So in this recipe, you take old bread and you cook potatoes. And while the potatoes cook, you prepare oil, some olive oil and garlic.
Okay.
And then you add your stale bread to the potatoes at the last minute. You strain it all and add the garlic mixture on top. Often it's served with greens like rapini or minestra or cicoria, other greens, or with beans.
Okay.
But it's good just plain as well. And my parents would often make this when we were little,
Okay.
and it always just makes me warm and fuzzy.
It does. Oh, that's so sweet.
And
Yeah.
it's really it's so delicious and so
So-
simple.
Are the potatoes boiled?
Yes, you boil the potatoes, and it's kind of a one pot thing. You boil the potatoes, and then at the very last minute, you put in the bread. So you
Okay.
cut old bread into pieces.
So, in what kind of circumstances would you share? Would you have it with your family? Was it like a staple, like polenta for me? It's like, bread. And,
Well, it was really whenever you had old bread, because of course you had to have that. So it was just whenever there was bread available, mostly in the winter because it's a nice warm. I mean, it takes forever to cool down. So, but it's really delicious, and it's very typical of my town in Puglia.
okay, what is the nicest memory you could share with us about eating? Is it more the making it or the eating it? What brings memory?
I would say probably the eating it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably like equivalent to how North Americans feel about chicken soup, like it's just,
like a comfort food, is it?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
And now it's actually a bit of a delicacy now. Like if you go to Puglia, sometimes fancy restaurants will serve like will serve pancotto e patate inside like a little sourdough loaf. Like they
Oh yes,
cut it out and
yeah.
serve it in there with greens and make it all fancy. But in the end, it's not fancy. It's a very simple
Yeah.
recipe.
I see. Thank you, Christina. I see the Caterina Moruso has a raise her hand. Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
It's not really a recipe. I just wanted to share
Absolutely.
the homemaking of bread, when we knead the bread and make the bread with my mother.
Yeah.
So that was a very important moment for us as young children, because we'd all participate in the making of the bread, waiting for the yeast to rise, and then kneading it all together and waiting for it to leaven and then put it in the oven. It was something that I reproduced during the COVID period with my children, but I mean, it didn't come out the same way.
There you go. See.
the perfume, the thing of sharing together, the family participating all together, it just brought back that type of memory.
So it didn't matter if you didn't taste the same. It was the convivial making it together that was important to you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you. What kind of bread? Is
It
it?
was white bread, no, simple white bread, nothing in particular. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing. I see there's two. There's Joanne and Anna. I thought there was three, but I can't really. I don't know if I'm not doing this. Oh, no,
There's
there's more.
Carm
Okay.
Krupi as well has her
Yeah.
hand up. And I think Francis originally had a hand or was trying to speak. I'm not sure, but
Okay,
yeah.
I'm trying to see if I can see everybody. Oh yeah, I can. I'm sorry. Okay. Who wants to go next? Because I couldn't keep up who raised their hand first, and I don't want to be rude. Joanne, you're at the top of my list. Would you like to go, Joanne?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make one little comment about Christina Pepe's story.
Yeah.
I'm from Sicily. I was born in Sicily, and I emigrated to Canada at the age of 7. So I remember quite a bit about our life in Sicily. And we were even more poor than you, Christina Pepe, because we ate bread, old stale bread, but we didn't even have potatoes. So all we did was put hot water and olive oil, salt, and pepper. And that's how we ate stale bread. If we'd had potatoes, that would have been a treat. But anyway, really what I wanted to share was, yeah, exactly. But what I really wanted to share was our recipe. Like as I said, I'm Sicilian. So what is the biggest pastry that everybody knows of Sicilian is cannoli.
Mhm.
And that is, yes. And that is what I remember best about getting together with my family on special occasions. It would be all my aunts coming together and my mother, different people's houses all the time. And cannoli, we usually made at Easter time. Christmas, we had other stuff, but cannoli we made at Easter time. And my aunts would all get together, and they would have different stations. One person would make the dough, prepare the dough and knead it. And then another person would roll it out and cut out the discs. And then another person would put it around the canes, because what my mother used to use were bamboo canes that were cut to size. She brought them from Sicily. Yeah, that's what they used to wrap around the dough around and seal it with a little bit of egg white. And then of course someone would be at the stove with a big pot of oil bubbling, and then you drop these in there until the dough was fried and golden. And then you set them aside and prepare the ricotta with a little sugar. And when we came to Canada, then there was other things you could add to it, like chocolate, which we didn't have in Sicily, but in Canada it was available. So we would watch my aunt chop little pieces of chocolate and put it in. I don't think they knew about chocolate chips at the time, but they cut up a chocolate bar in little pieces and added to that. And then we filled them. We watched my aunts usually did it. When we got older, they let us do it, but we filled them with a knife, and we just push it into the cannoli shell. We call them scorci. In Sicilian, we call them scorci, the shells, and we'd fill the shells. And then they would allow us children to put the decoration at the end of each cannolo, and that would be half a maraschino cherry. That's what we usually decorate at the end with, half a maraschino. So we were allowed to put that at the end. So I have.
No, go finish. I just want to.
I have very fond memories of doing it, making the cannoli, because it was a family affair. And, my uncles would all be watching around the table, but my aunts would be working away and doing different things. None of them are with us except my mother, who is still with us. And she is 107 years old.
Congrats.
Unfortunately, but unfortunately, she can't help with that anymore. She's a little beyond that, but it's nice to know she's still here though. Yeah.
So for Christina, it was more the eating that brought memories, and for you would say that it's more the assembly, the making it.
Absolutely.
More than eating it.
To be honest, cannoli are not my favorite dessert.
There you go. See.
Yes. But I love the memories of making them, and that's really how I know how to make them. And no one else in my family has. I'm the only one who is continuing any of the recipes and traditions. I think cooking traditions of our Sicilian family. Everybody else kind of, they don't know how. They don't care how. And I have set down the recipes for like my children, my daughter, and you know, nieces and nephews. If they ask me, I will give it to them, the recipe I have. But I have to say that none of these recipes that my relatives had, my aunts, my mother, were written down. You know, it was all just from
Yeah.
their head. And
Well, the
you know,
same with me, right? The same with me. I wouldn't, I started myself to, I was, for a few years, for a couple of years, some years ago, I had a little blog that one of the members of the Association of Italian Canadian Writer, she had a blog called Italo Canadese. And within that, I had a series of Agatha De Santis. And within that, I had a series called Tutti a Tavola. And for that, I would basically write little articles based on this workshop, for example. And I had to write the recipe. And I said, I don't, there's no place for me. And so I had to kind of remember or have to look similar things up. But it was mostly all oral things that I brought over with me. So,
exactly. Yeah.
well, thank you.
And I also have, okay, I also have a blog, and the recipe is on my blog. If anybody is interested, they can get it. It's
You
just, I can
yeah.
put it on the chat.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay,
Yes, please. Thank you. We'll do that.
I'm really enjoying this.
Oh, good.
Great. Thank you for
Good.
having it.
No, thank you. I'm really happy. Okay, so next at the top is Anna Maiolo. So
Sorry, Julia, I just
Yeah.
want to tell everybody, because Darlene's saying she can't see people's faces. So if you go to the top, click on view, and you have a choice there, standard, side-by-side speaker, or side-by-side gallery. If you click on side-by-side gallery, you will see all the faces. You also have a sort of a delineation between the PowerPoint and the faces. And if you shove that with your cursor to the left, you will see all the faces. I hope that helps.
Yeah.
Okay, so now where's Anna? I lost
Yeah.
Anna.
No,
Oh,
I'm here. There
okay.
you go. Hi.
Okay, hi.
I loved your introduction. It was so moving. I could actually picture it.
Thank you. That's very
Um,
kind. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I don't really have like a written recipe, but when I
Okay.
got on and you started talking, I was, and what the prompt brought me to my mother making Sunday sauce,
Okay.
the Sunday morning sauce.
Yeah.
So, you know, like every day she would cook, and it would be some kind of, you know, pasta dish, obviously, you know, like a pasta bischiata, you know, like with a fagioli or whatever. But on Sunday, she would make this sauce, and it would be just, you know, she would put beef cubes or pork cubes or something like this. And we're three sisters and a brother, and the three sisters would be in a bedroom very, very close to the kitchen. And my mother would put on this sauce quite early, and the smell of the sauce would wake us up. Like it would make our mouth water, even if it was like, I don't know, 8 o'clock in the morning. It would just make us want to get up because we could smell the stirring of the onion in the oil, and then the meat like sizzling, and then the tomatoes just kind of like, we could hear it, we could smell it, we could almost taste it in our mouth. And so, you know, that's the recipe that stuck in my mind as we were doing this little exercise. And then as we got older, my mother would make us get up actually and take turns, and everybody would have to make the sauce. We would have to learn how to make this sauce.
Oh, good.
And then in the morning, my father, you know, he was a simple laborer. He would work almost 7 days a week. And on Sundays, obviously, he would go to work. And he would, you know, we would prepare this sauce. And that time, I don't know if anybody remembers Teledomenica. It's an Italian program that was just in the morning on CFCF or CTV, I think it was.
In Montreal.
In Montreal only, yeah, exactly. And we were very excited. Well, my parents were, because finally they could hear some Italian. And they had one of these really big TVs in the living room, and we would bring the kitchen table into the living room so that we could watch this Teledomenica, so that they could hear the Italian, and then bring out the sauce with the pasta or whatever it was that we were making and watch the Teledomenica. And that was really our Sundays with our parents. And and I have these vivid memories, all of the sensory, I guess it's sensories going on. And then, I grew up, I got married, I have boys, and, I would do the same thing. And obviously we wouldn't be watching Teledomenica, but, I would be making that sauce in the morning and they would get up. And as they were teenagers or young adults going out at night, the only way to get them up in the morning on a Sunday morning, like they would go out on a Saturday night.
Good, it works.
I was smart, I would put the sauce on and do it to start the thing, start the sauce, and the smell would wake them up so that they could come and eat at lunchtime, And now my boys, one of them has 3 children, and he does the same thing. And it's just
that's
so beautiful.
Wonderful. It is
It's-
wonderful.
It is. It really, really is to see that he's doing the same thing. He makes the same sauce. But, as I say to him, anytime he just comes over, he says, Mom, make the sauce. We're coming over.
Of course. Mommy sauce is always better.
Yeah. So that's my story.
Well, thank you, Anna. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Next is Carm. And I think you need,
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
yes, yeah.
Okay. I must apologize. I can't show my face because I'm in a rural area and my internet connection either allows audio or video and often doesn't allow both. But I am so enjoying everybody's stories. I guess when I was thinking about different recipes, it was hard to narrow one down, but I do remember the day I learned to make tagliatelle with my mother. I'm Calabrian, not born in Italy, but first generation Italian American now living in Canada. And when I learned to make it, it was back in '98, and I had had my second child who had been a preemie. I was a very flustered, relatively new bride mother. And my mom had finally come to visit after several years of isolation after losing my dad in '96. And we convinced her to come because of the baby. And I brought the baby home after 3 months in hospital, and then an awful blizzard hit Toronto, and we were closed in the house and couldn't go anywhere with this small, frail child, couldn't really move to get any groceries. And I, being in the state that I was in a panic. And so my mother turned to me and said, do you not remember who we are and where we came from? Do you have flour? And I said, yes, I do. Do you not have water? And I said, yes, we do. She goes, then we will eat. Stop that. So she got out the flour and water and started mixing together these tagliatelle. And she insisted that the proper way to do it was hand cutting, never with a machine, because that thick, she said, if you want to feed your family and fill a belly, you make them nice and thick. Again, that cucina povera coming out. And then as she was doing these tagliatelle, I got this whole economics lesson, which is so interesting, economics and family history, because she'd say to me, now we make with flour and water. But when you add eggs. In the war, we never did, she'd say. But when you can add eggs. The rich people sometimes would flavor with a bit of homemade wine. And so she would just give me all these versions of what you can do. And then she'd say, today we have the sauce in the jars, because of course we still do our homemade sauce. So she said, we always have the sauce. And if you can add some cerish. And if you can't, you have a plain. And if times are good, you add some meat. And so she's rolling out this pasta, and my mom is not, I think many of us can relate, not, the old, she's very old school. She's never going to say, don't worry. She's not going to sit there and she'll just, through parables, like a female Jesus Christ, we'll give her lessons, we'll give her therapy, we'll give her, but always in action and working with the flour and the water. And several years ago, my niece got married, and I know many people have spoken about recipes not being written down and how important it is to write them down. And my niece said, I don't know when we're not gonna, my mom, thank God, is still with us, but she goes, I don't know what I'm gonna do when Nonna goes. How am I gonna make all those Nonna cookies and all those Nonna recipes? And so as a wedding gift to my niece, I sat down with my mom and transcribed a lot of her recipes into English, so that my niece, and now I have copies for the other nieces and nephews, can have her recipes. And whenever I could, I tried to write down some of the memories I had for the recipes for them,
wonderful.
because
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
they don't know those memories and they wouldn't understand it all because it's lost in translation being English speaking. So but I do remember, oddly enough, you know, getting a bit of family history and an economics lesson, a reassurance, I guess, that marriage and motherhood was going to be okay, that our family and our ancestors had been through things before and we'd be okay.
I encourage everyone that is having thoughts of writing down to please do so. And speaking of, don't we have flour? Don't we have water? Let's eat. When I did some field work in Cape Breton in Nova Scotia, where there is a community of Italians, mostly from Treviso, where I'm from. And I remember speaking with a gentleman that said, oh, you know, those English, they call everybody that isn't Italian English. So those English people, they take a tomato and they make a flower out of it as if it's like a decoration on a plate. But we Italian, we take a tomato and out of it we make breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So I thought that was very resourceful. It's that Aranjarsi kind of mentality where you have to just make it do. So before we go to the
Very
second
much so.
prompt, very quickly to Frances, who had her hand
Yes,
raised.
thank you. Thank you. The recipe that I'm going to talk about is a honeyed loaf that my mother used to make for celebrations. And in dialect, it's called mustazzolo. And I have a picture of her preparing for some kind of, I don't know if you can see it, some kind of event. And
Yeah.
these are the way that, this is the way that she would bake in abundance
yeah.
for family celebrations. And I asked her at one point if she could give me the recipe for this honeyed loaf. And she gave me the recipe, but it started with a 10-pound sack of flour and multiple cartons of eggs and multiple containers of honey. So it was not practical for me to make it. So we spent some time trying to adapt the recipe, because this would be a recipe, probably, as many have mentioned, that came from an oral tradition or from a tradition of watching your mother or your grandmother.
Yeah.
So we experimented and whatever, but we never got it quite right. And then just by a fluke, we were shopping at, do you remember Chapters, when you used to buy a book in Chapters?
Yes.
And
yeah.
we came along, we saw this book, Cooking with the Five Senses. And it was written by a woman who came from Calabria, the same village as my husband. And inside was the recipe for mustazzolo.
Oh, there you go.
So finally we were able to, you know, we kept experimenting, but it was never quite right. Eventually my husband took over, even though he's not a baker, and he was able to really come up with the closest version of it. And it was a sweet that was always present at family celebrations, weddings, baptisms, whatever. And it's very simple, but it's very luscious. And it always reminded me of my mother and her love of cooking, her generosity, cooking in abundance. You know, if there was a celebration, everything had to be abundant. And throughout Canada, my family now is throughout all of Canada, they've all experimented and come up with a version that they think is close to my mother's, but it will never, of course, be perfect because she's no longer here.
I'm sorry.
But it does remind me of her resourcefulness, the importance of celebrating life with family or friends, simplicity of ingredients, abundance, and transmitting, you know, to the next generation.
Thank you. Thank you. These are
Oh,
wonderful.
you're welcome.
I think we should work on bringing a book together with all these wonderful recipes and the stories that go with it. All right.
Absolutely.
So next prompt, I'm going to bring it up. So I would like you to take a couple of minutes. You can revisit the same recipe. Other people are welcome to speak and share. You might be repeating some of the things, but with this prompt, I really want you to talk how this recipe helps you in forging your identity. How does it relate to you specifically as a person? And when you are making it, you can just give me a list of the emotions that you feel when you are preparing it, which is very, very important. And I leave you a couple of minutes, and I'm very grateful that you are willing to share. This is very precious. Thank you so much. And we are back. Anybody would like to start? Don't be shy.
Hi, Julia. I can go ahead.
Yep.
So the recipe that I picked is pizza di riso, which is essentially a pie with a type of rice pudding in it. Very simple ingredients with the Italian rice and some ricotta. And for me, the forging identity part, it's a pie that my mom makes every Easter, and my daughter has had an interest in learning how to do it and how to keep this tradition going.
Oh, wonderful.
So of course it links to my Italian identity. It links to my identity as a daughter, as a mother. The simplicity of the ingredients and the way my mother I actually can't see myself on video, so I don't know if you'll be able to see
I can,
this.
yeah.
You can,
I
but
can, yeah.
my mother wrote the recipe on, you know, when you get a brand new Kleenex box and you like open,
Yeah.
you take off the little cardboard piece.
Yes.
She
yeah.
wrote it on the back of that, like to
Okay.
not waste paper. So there's that environmentally friendly identity as well,
Absolutely,
where
yeah.
they reuse and they don't waste anything. So in terms of the emotions, definitely happiness and gratitude and pride that, you know, my mom at 88 is still able to do this, but also some sadness and regret because my dad also enjoyed cooking and he had some recipes, but I was too late. I didn't get to really, you know, learn those recipes sort of side by side with him. And luckily I have some that are written down. So yeah, a combination of emotions.
May I ask where the recipe is from? Because I'm not very familiar with pizza di riso.
Where is it from? Well, we're from the region of Molise
Okay.
in Italy. And yeah, so it's basically, you know, for the base of the pie, there's flour and water and some baking soda. And then you do the rice mixture with the ricotta and some sugar and a little bit of grated a peel from an orange.
Okay.
And yeah, it's quite delicious.
Oh, it sounds awesome. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing it.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? No? Don't be shy. Go ahead, Carm. Just unmute yourself because I think you're still, yeah, there you go. Go ahead.
Yes, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Actually, mine is beyond simple. I was just thinking about chicoria salad or
Okay.
dandelion salad.
Yes.
And I think for me, when I was going back to the basics, that used to be something I did with my dad. My mom would gather the chicoria and he and I would clean it on the porch. And so for me, the identity would be that was when I kind of, you know, got to bond with my dad, be daddy's little girl for sure. And it was just very centering because it was a repetitive cleaning of the dandelions and then swishing them in the water and washing them, and that those repetitive tasks just centered me. And I was always a very agitated little child. And also this incredible feeling of being blessed, because it always amazed me that we could look out on our farm and just see all this chicoria and almost being like, that's free food, like we're going to be okay, you know, like that idea of that God provides in very simple ways, and there's abundance when you choose to look. I think that's what I think about, and it's simple. And yes, we were mocked growing up in the States.
I was going to ask you if anybody ever commented on it, because I know.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, we were peasants, and we were, what's wrong with us, and why do we pick weeds, and you know, so there was a lot of that. But for the way my family framed it was, you know, this is abundance. This is what God gives you. This is healthy. It's wholesome. So that's what I associate with it.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else would like to share? Jennifer. Go ahead, Jennifer. The floor is yours. I can't hear you. No.
Try without the headphones.
Yeah. Let's see if I can unmute. Yeah, no. Is there anything that I can do?
Jennifer, you need to unmute because you're muted now.
It still says that you, yeah, I still see the mute on. Yeah, now you are unmuted, but I still can't hear you.
Is the volume on? No.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
no, I can
Oh,
hear
there you
now.
go.
now you
Yeah,
can hear
go
me.
ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, maybe it's a fairly new laptop, so maybe that's the issue. And I feel like I'm the non-Italian who snuck into this group thanks to
It's
Anna,
for
who invited me.
everyone.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
there. You don't
I'm
have
so
to be
happy. Yeah,
Italian. No.
absolutely. It's open
Oh.
to anyone. Yeah.
And
Thank
you don't
for
need to
being
be a
here.
senior either, obviously.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. What actually I find in common with all of these stories is poverty, or just not having a lot and making do with what you have. And the story that comes to mind, it's not necessarily a dish I've made a lot, although I have made it once because my daughter wanted to know what it was all about, because I had talked to her about this dish. It's called buns on the stove, and it's the most simple dish you could imagine. And it grew out of a necessity at a time, because I asked my mother recently the story of this particular dish. And what it was, to describe the dish, is you would take brown sugar and water and some butter, and you would make a sauce out of that. And then you would make biscuit dough, and you would drop it like dumplings on this into this pot of boiling sugary sauce, put the lid on it, and 15 minutes later, you had this beautiful dessert that everyone loved. And it grew out of the fact that my mom had a wood stove at the time, and she would work out in the fields with my father. And then when she would get back, you could not make a cake in 15 minutes in a wood oven. So what she found this recipe and she thought it was really good. So she would make this. And what was great about it, you could make the dessert itself in about 10 minutes. And then while we were eating our meal, it would cook away. And as soon as the meal was done, this dessert was ready to go. And sometimes we would add ice cream. And to me, it is the emotion that it elicits for me is that resourcefulness of someone who's living in a rural area, just the resourcefulness of women to come up with something, very simple ingredients, as many people have said before, almost that making something out of nothing mentality. And so I feel proud that my mother had created this, or she had adopted this recipe and made it for years and years and years. And my daughter thought it was great when I made it for her at my mom's a couple of years ago. It's a little story.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It's wonderful. Anybody else before we move to the last prompts? Okay, so I'm going to pull up the last two questions. So the first one is, and I'm referring specifically about recipe that have traveled from a country to another, or where you move and the ingredients that are available are not the same. So does it taste the same as the one you're trying to recreate? And if not, how does that impact the memories you're trying to preserve? And how important, so going back to one of the objectives, reproducing or preserving, and how important is it for you to pass it on? And again, I'll give you 2 minutes. Oops, I don't know what I did here. Oh no, no, never mind. It just left me. Okay, and I'm back. I'm sorry, I'm gonna put up the prompt again. The PowerPoint just, oh no, that left me there. Okay, so here we are with the almost time to say bye, but here we are with the last two questions. I open the floor for anybody that would like to share.
I'll share something, Julia. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, Joanne, thank you.
Well, you're asking, is it the same, can we recreate the same dishes or whatever that our families made? Well, you have to kind of watch and see how they did it and be there and participated with them. I think really to make something that tastes and is exactly the same. Recipes alone are great, but it's even better when you can actually watch, someone actually make the dish or whatever. And I did a lot of that when I was young because I loved cooking. I always did. And I love to watch my aunts and my mother prepare things. So I'm the designated person that, has these memories either in my head. I've tried to write them down, a lot of them, and I tried to get information from my mother a few years back when she was in a little better shape. So I did try to write them down. But you want to know how important it is to pass these recipes on. I think it's important. I think it's very important. But more than that, I have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and they're grown now, of course, have their own families. But they want the recipes. They ask me for the recipes. Even my sons, they say, "Oh, Mom, how do you make this? We used to love it when Nonna made this. How do you make it?" So, sometimes I actually have to sit down and try to remember how it was made. And so it's not just that I'd like to pass it on. They want it. They want it to be passed on to them. They want to be able to make,
That's
so
great.
I think it's very important, to put these recipes down and pass them on. Yes, I do. Yeah.
Anybody else wants? Thank you, Joanne. Anybody else wants to share their experience? Yep. Anna.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Joanne. I think that it's really important to try to reproduce. I mean, obviously you have everything in here in your mind and you try to write it down, but maybe if you did some kind of like I don't know, video storytelling of sorts so that it's there forever and ever, I guess. But for me too, I feel maybe it's not the same sauce that my mother made, because maybe the can of tomato is different.
Yeah.
But it's the same concept and you have the same emotions that come out, I think. And I think that's what counts, is the emotions that you get from making that recipe that you remember from your mother or your aunt or whomever it is. And I think it's important to pass it on because it's like a legacy that you leave. It's a legacy that you leave, and that, as you said at the beginning of your presentation, Julia, you said something about roots, the roots, like you take the recipe and it's like the root, and the root sort of like spreads, and it spreads in different directions. It's only because in effect, maybe you might not have that porcini mushroom, but somebody will make it and they'll remember. And it's just, for me, I think it's really important. It's more important than leaving materialistic things. I think it's important to leave something that my children and my grandchildren, whoever, would like to keep that as to keep it going.
Thank you, Anna. And I see that Karma's raised her hand. Go ahead. Just unmute yourself. Yep.
Okay, just briefly, I was just thinking about many recipes, and one of the things that I notice that is a huge difference between my mother's hand at doing things and my own is she's much more generous with salt. Everything seems very salty, and I'm mindful, we know more about what's good for us and what isn't, so we try to be lighter with the salt, but it doesn't have that comfort. But I do use less salt, but I feel a little bit better knowing that it's not a total deviation from the original recipe, and that I know that she was a heavy salter, I guess, because of the lack of refrigeration back home, and they had to salt to preserve. And so I feel like it's less of a sacrilege to take some of the salt out, knowing that the environmental circumstances and being in North America has changed. But that's the thing that really strikes me, is the difference in salting.
Okay. Thank you. I see Darlene has raised her hand. Hi, Darlene.
Hi. Two quick comments. It skips a generation sometime. I never made spaghetti and meatballs with my son, who has a chemical engineering degree, but he has been trying to replicate my mother's meatballs for years. And last year he announced that he thought he got it right. And it was a combination of enough breadcrumbs and fennel. And he felt that by grinding the fennel and the combination of breadcrumbs, that he had gotten the texture and the taste correctly. And he was very proud of that effort. And for me, this Easter, I made rabbit cacciatore. And I was thinking of the story my mother always told, my late mother now, always told of her mother, who would come up to the farm, rented farm from Cook's Clothing down on Front Street on weekends, and her husband had caught a rabbit, and the most important thing to do was to have it under cold water, salted cold water for days. Now I let the cold water run for about a solid hour or 2 hours while I'm making the sauce for the cacciatore, which is again from my mother's speaking of the story. You crush the tomatoes and you add some vinegar, and balsamic vinegar ideally, and sweeten it with some raisins, and you marinate the rabbit in this and of course oregano and the Italian seasonings. You marinate it. She used to for 2 days, but which I think is lethal. But marinate it overnight, and then you remove the whole process of cooking the rabbit. You remove it, pat it dry, and then you roast it in olive oil, and then you cook the cacciatore sauce on top of the oven separately, and then make the fettuccine and serve my son this Easter announced that I had finally got the rabbit cacciatore perfectly.
Congrats.
But it's skipped a generation from Nicolina Leone to me with the rabbit, and from my mother to my son with the meatballs.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Darlene. So anybody else wants to share? We have, Christina Pepe did. Go ahead, Christina.
Hi again.
Hi.
So I find it really, I've cooked with my mom sort of my whole life, but recently, like the more I do it, the more I get stories from her. And, like I was making sourdough starter like everybody else did in the pandemic. And, all of a sudden I heard this story she's never told me before about when she was a little girl, they used to share the starter, the whole town. And she would have to go into the street and yell, "Acriscitor," to find out who the last person who made bread was, who would have the criscitor. And she just remembers doing that. So that was she had never told me that before, but it just comes out during cooking.
Yeah.
And also she loves egg whites. I could never understand why she had this fascination for egg whites. In fact, she discards the yolks and will eat, and it's just the white, and it's not for health reasons. She's not trying to lower her cholesterol. Yeah. And finally I said, what is it with the egg whites? And she explained that, when she was young, they were so poor, they couldn't afford eggs, but her mother's comadre was, rich and had eggs. and they would make, they would get 7 eggs in the morning, and she would only feed her children the red. And so she would give my mother or my grandmother, my nonna, the whites. And so when my mom had got to eat egg whites, it was a feast. And so even today, 80 years later, she just loves egg whites. It just brings her joy. I thought that was a little bit sad, but also really fascinating. That
it is fascinating. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So I just want to put up the last, we actually have just 4 minutes for questions, but I want to leave you with my email address. If there is anything that you would like to know further, or, recipes that you saw listed here, or maybe we can work on a cookbook together, Resilient Women and the Cucina Povera. I think it would be great. If you have any questions, we got 2 minutes left. No, 4, sorry. Geez, I know math. 4, before I say thank you for participating, and goodbye. Don't be shy.
I really enjoyed this.
Oh, thank you, Anna.
It was really fun.
Oh, good. I'm pleased.
Mhm.
I must admit, this was my very first workshop. I usually give presentations or lectures. I was a little not worried, but I don't have the greatest self-esteem, so I wasn't sure if I could do it, but I really enjoyed it. I'm really grateful for you for listening to me and for sharing your stories and memories with me, and I hope you can do it again, because a lot was shared. I think more could be shared, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity. So thank you very much.
Brava.
Oh, thank you. Yes, Jennifer.
So I just wanted to say that in the blog I keep, I've talked a number of times about how music allows people to access memories. And I think some of, and Christina's last story reflects this, I think, that sometimes it's only by doing the cooking or that the memory comes back. And so it's wonderful to be able to cook with our family members, and in that process to have memories triggered and memories shared.
Yeah,
and I thought you did an amazing job, Giulia.
Oh, thank you so much. I do actually have a question for all of you, because I'm really interested. So because I wasn't brought up in the kitchen, I didn't have that that situation that I heard of, the secret ingredients or the secret recipe, or that little thing that you never ever know. They will never tell you, because you have to reach, I don't know, something, a level of intimacy or trust maybe that you never do. And so there is always this tiny little component that is missing. And I'm referring in particular to my mother-in-law, whose one side is Calabrian, and she was supposed to know how to make ravioli from her aunts, but every time she showed up for the ravioli making session, they were already made. There was always, or they were already made, or they couldn't do it, or because, and so she never got to know the missing component. Did that ever happen to you, that it was kind of kept as a secret in sharing?
Not on purpose. Not on purpose.
Not on purpose, okay.
I know, like my mom doesn't measure anything. She's like, un puño di questo, un puño di questo, quanto basta. Nothing specific, but I don't think I don't think the secret ingredient was ever on purpose.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Anybody got this kind of experience?
I might add, Giulia, that I think sometimes it's not a nefarious thing. It could be because, like in the case of my parents, I think, with a grade 3, grade 4 education, writing it out was actually challenging and is challenging. So there's, there's spelling errors, they're sounding it out however they think. So I think maybe writing out the recipe is a bit intimidating. So it's not that they don't want to share it, but it's like a very big project.
For them. Okay. Thank you, Anna. Anyone else? Well, 1:30 it is. I think it was perfectly timed.
So I'm going to close.
Yes.
You all have Julia's email address on the screen, and you can stay in touch if you like. So Julia, thanks so much for
Thank
this
you.
wonderful workshop. It
Thank
was
you.
wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
And thanks everyone for coming and for sharing. So I've added in the chat that you can go to acenti.ca/workshops to see the future workshops. The next one is on Saturday, May 13th at 12 o'clock, and that is with Christopher DiRado. His workshop is titled The Many Definitions of Family, Reflecting and Journaling with Chris DiRado. And I've also added the registration link in the chat. But if you go to the Acenti/workshops page, you will find the link to register for each workshop as it becomes available. So thank you all for being here at Acenti's Workshops to Express Creativity, Engaging Canadian Seniors, a project made possible through the financial support of Employment and Social Development Canada as part of the New Horizons Seniors Program.